I feel very lonely. If you can just brace me with your presence in front. I know, I heard a ooh. Just if you can fill up some rows in front, it will be really appreciated. And would like to also welcome everybody that is here and that is also joining us online. I hope everybody is excited to be here. We are really blessed this morning to have some great speakers to be talking to us about sustainability, developmental goals. And I hope you guys are also anticipating to have a different conversation after every speaker has spoken today. Thumbs up? Okay, I'm just checking if people are listening. Sharp. Okay. Without wasting any time, I know we're running slightly behind our program. My name is Busisiwe Huma, and oral. Everybody that knows me, you can call me Bus Eye, it's okay. You see, it happens again. And you can also say I'm humorous because my name and surname is humorous. No laughter? Okay. I was trying to break ice, guys, because accountants are so straightforward, but anyway, it's all good. I'm really hoping to have fun with you guys today. I'm also anticipating to learn a lot from our speakers. And without wasting any time, I would like to call Dr. Chiku to come up front to just give us a welcome address. Can we just give him a warm clap of hands? Thanks.
Good morning. Let me try. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's better. Let me start by welcoming all of you. Before I present the address by the Dean, I'm addressing you on behalf of the Dean. So I think it's only fair that you can also call me Dean for now, because I'm wearing his shoes. The Sustainable Development Goals are a set of 17 goals that were adopted by the United Nations member states in the year 2015. These SDGs aim to achieve peace, prosperity, and sustainability for people and the planet by the year 2030. United Nations estimates that about 17% of the world's population lives at or below $1.25 per day. For it to make sense, that is about 22.76 rands per day. In absolute numbers, we are talking about over 1 billion people living at or below 22.76 rands per day. The world is indeed poor, my good friends. On the other hand, we've also noted a change in global and regional climatic conditions, which is attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. We have noted in the recent past some developments which are a testament to some climatic changes. Of note are the following. Flooding in Dubai. The country recorded the highest amount of rainfall in 75 years. Flooding in Kenya. The El Nino weather pattern caused storms and flash floods which displaced more than 60,000 people. Flooding in our own KZN. 40 people were killed and a total of 74 were injured. About 247 homes were destroyed and approximately 800 homes suffered damage. And most recently, there was snowfall in the US. Normally, snowfall is experienced in October every year. However, media reports indicate that there was snowfall recently in the US. While we cannot attribute these developments to only climatic change, we can agree that climate change had a hand in these. As the College of Accounting Sciences at UNISA, we take advantage of the R&I Week established by the university to contribute to this topic on SDGs, particularly focusing on how entities can sustainably make their profits. To ensure that there is a clear balance in how entities utilize their different capitals for the good of the people and the planet. On behalf of the College of Accounting Sciences, let me welcome all of you to this discussion. Let me take this opportunity to welcome our guest speakers, Prof. Anil, all the way from the Philippines. Prof, you are most welcome. And I hope you are going to enjoy our hospitality. We have nice food around. I hope Prof. Berry will take you around. Let me also welcome Prof. Warren Maroon from WITS. We are aware that you are enjoying your well-deserved break, but you set aside to share with us your insights virtually. Thank you so much for being here. Let me also welcome Mr. Neil Morris, a partner at KPMG. Oftentimes, as academics, we tend to create our narratives that sometimes do not speak to the needs of the industry. Ms. Morris will share with us the industry perspective today. And Mr. Morris, you are most welcome to UNISA. Colleagues, friends, and all stakeholders who are also following these proceedings virtually, you are most welcome to the proceedings of the day. Please enjoy the proceedings, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chiku, for that welcome. Do you feel welcomed? Okay. On a serious note, our next speaker is Professor Uwe, which I was privileged this morning to just speak to him shortly so that I do not butcher his surname, and I got it right the first time. Yay. Just to indicate his accolades, he's a full professor in the Department of Accountancy at the De Alla Salle University. He has served various administrative roles in the same university, including being a Vice Chancellor for Administration and Chief Compliance Officer. He is a lead assessor and trainer in the ASEN University Network Quality Assurance, and in the Philippines, he served as a chairperson of the Commission on Higher Education, Technical Committee on the Accountancy since 2014. He is a member of both Philippines Interpretation Committee and Sustainability Reporting Committee under the Financial and Sustainability Reporting Standards Council of the Philippines. In 2023, he was awarded the Senete Award of Excellence given to the top 100 CPA. Let's give him a hand clap for that achievement. Wow. In the country for the past 100 years by the Professional Regulatory Board of Accountancy of the Philippines. He is also a recipient of a lifetime achievement. Sure, I am already challenged and inspired by reading this profile, given by the Institute of Certified Management Accountants. He finished his doctorate in business, and he's both a certified public accountant and a certified management accountant. Please help me welcome Professor Uwe on the stage, and he will be addressing the contribution of accounting to sustainability reporting and achieving sustainable developmental goals. Thank you.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. That's more I like it, right? I've been a professor for more than 4 decades, and it's not easy for us to start a session as boring as accounting with debits and credits and all of those things. But nonetheless, it's been an honor and a privilege for me to travel all the way here and discuss one of the vital concerns of our time. I think as accountants, we want to be sustainable too. We don't want what we do to be parked and become extinct at the end of the day. So today, allow me to share my perspective as an accountant and maybe as an educator. I have been with the academe taking a look at how the trends are moving in terms of what we need, in terms of raising up the accountants, not only in our country, but also in other parts of the ASEAN nation, right? And today, allow me to just do that with you. Okay, thanks. Is this working now? I prepared some slides just for us to have that sense of, I know that if I just talk, 90% of this will be gone when you step out of that room. But with some visuals, I think that would help us limit that particular disruptions or that particular thing to at least 50% of what we're going to be discussing will stick. And hopefully that becomes now a spark, a catalyst to some future conversations that we will have. Most of us here are either accountants or auditors, or some, at least online, are aspiring accountants and auditors too. And that's the reason why when I talk about the contributions that we have as a profession, I might want to do this. Sorry. No, sorry. I think it's here. I opened it already. No. I think it's here. Okay. Technical. Let me just go through here. There you go. Oh, what happened? It's okay. So, okay, good. There you go. Oh, okay. So let me just start by taking a look at a little trip down memory lane, right? For most of us, accountants, we find ourselves working on our books and sometimes auditing some of our clients. But what is it really that we do? Yeah, thank you. There you go. What is it really that we do as accountants? Ever since time started, let's just take a look at history as a way for us to learn our lesson so that we continue to become relevant and not be extinct. We notice that from the historical context, let's take a look at, for example, how society has progressed over time. We know that our roots dates back to the time when the Mesopotamian Empire started to take a look at records, and those records are actually about agricultural yield, transactions that happen in terms of trade, etc. But that was actually more than 100 years for us, right, to consider. But if you want to fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, which is more recent in our memory, we see that accountants also played a very critical and crucial role in managing the financial complexity of a growing business enterprise. And this is the reason why the evolving roles of the accountant started to continue to expand as businesses tried now to cope with different transactions, whether that be in their community or actually in a global sphere. And this expanding role of the accountant started to ensure that economic stability happens even during this rapid industrial growth that we experienced. Now, moving towards the 20th century, we see that the Great Depression of the 1920s and the 1930s was a period of significant economic turmoil for most of us. Recent history tells us that the lack of transparency, of course, and accountability in the financial practices was a contributing factor to all of this. And this has led the establishment of stricter standards in accounting and the formation of regulatory boards. In fact, this year, we commemorate the centennial of how SECs in the United States required, for the first time, companies to submit a financial report annually. Before that, it was just voluntary. So that was just 100 years ago. The 20th century started to also take up awareness of the environmental concerns that we see. To take center stage, of course, we cannot help but refer to the Brundtland Report, entitled Our Common Future, which started the discussion on how we can grow and develop as a society and yet be sustainable. That particular report introduced that concept of sustainable development. This proved to be very, very important and highlighted the interconnectedness of economic growth, social equity, and environmental protection, which for us now is actually in our center stage of sustainability as a movement. In response to all of this, we see the role of accountants evolving beyond the traditional financial reporting. We are now called to start focusing also on non-financial data to provide a more holistic view of organizational performance. GRI, for example, started to create the first framework for sustainability reporting way back in 1997, and this framework tried now to organize these particular disclosures in terms of environmental, social, and even governance impact. And this set the stage to our future sustainability reporting standards. Of course, 2015, we are actually ushered in the era of UN SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, which requires all of us to contribute towards peace, prosperity, and of course, in the process, become now sustainable as we now try to use the resources of this earth and pass it on to the next generation. Now, these goals underscore, of course, the importance of sustainable development and is critical to various professions, including us accountants. And this is where I will take our discussion and start our discussion on. We realize that since then, the world has gone through a lot of revolutions, as they say. There's a lot of debate about this, but by and large, at least in the ASEAN context, we experience and we accept that we are now in the 5th industrial revolution. If we have not yet been able to recover from the effect of the 4th, much more the 5th. The revolutions keep on happening in a shorter and shorter span of time. And this actually led us also to a lot of disruptions. That is actually a picture of what we call our COVID-19 as a black swan, because this is an example of the situations that we now see around us happening quite more often. Right? Nassim Taleb pointed to us that kind of an event, and which is actually going to be very, very impossible to happen with this remote probability, but yet when it happens, it has catastrophic effect. Now, add to that, of course, is that our world has now been redrawn. Rarely do we now see the world map as having those countries and jurisdictions. We are now more connected, and this is actually what we see. My friend in Singapore, Parag Khanna, wrote that book on connectography, and he shared with us this picture. Notice how the world now has changed the way we see the things around us. I think this is very important as we continue on reflecting on the role of accountants in sustainability reporting and achievement of their goals. Interconnectedness and globalization is just part of the heart of these things. Now, as accountants, we are actually also recognizing that there are a lot of us that we face. Last year, 2023, if you have not heard the news yet, we are actually welcoming the first non-human accountant or chartered accountant or CPA in our midst. And that is actually ChatGPT 4.0. In May of 2023, ChatGPT already passed the AI CPA exam. So how are you comfortable working with non-human as part of our profession? Now, of course, there's a lot of reforms that happened since then, right? Now, so maybe one of the things that I'd like to focus on are, what are some of the drivers of the changes that we are going to grapple with, specifically since as a profession, we're now confounded with a lot of these trends. Connectivity, likewise, the understanding of having AI as part of the way we do things, right? Maybe I'll just zero in on two, and this is actually what was alluded to earlier. First, of course, is the driver of technology and advancement. More and more, we see that big data, data science, and generative AI are part already of our work and consideration. I am not sure if this is actually discussed in any classroom or in any class that prepares accountants for the future. Seemingly, this is a separate discipline that normally is with the computer science people, and yet we use this data for our own work. We generate those data, right? Not only financial, but likewise non-financial. And this is going to continue on. Second, of course, is sustainability. More and more discussions and development in this field are now upon us, taking a look at how we account for sustainability. Not just transactions that goes into the financial records that we have, but what are some of the other impacts and implications of these transactions beyond financial. And this is actually where we take a look at sustainability accounting, sustainability reporting, taking a look at different standards that we now use. For instance, just recently, ISSB had two separate boards, the Financial Reporting Standards Board and the Sustainability Standards Board. And these are already part of what accountants should actually be able to do to contribute. And not to mention assurance. And I leave that to Warren later on to talk about assurance and ISA 5000, and of course to Neil, as auditors now try to grapple with a territory that is not something that they are used to for most part. And because of this, we are here as a part of a conversation that prepares the next generation of accountants. And I think the next generation is very, very important simply because even the International Federation of Accountants has already made significant stride to address these two particular drivers. One, they started now to take a look at the competency model of what are initial accountants, or what they call initial professional development for accountants. These are IES, or International Education Standards 2, 3, and 4. In 2019, they actually revised it primarily to consider the impact of ICT in our profession. And this is actually the reason why the current version of the standards that is global in application is actually includes those areas where we used to say not part of our discipline. But yet, that's not all. Starting last quarter of 2023, IFAC actually embarked on a project, and that is called the Sustainability Reporting Project. The project required the International Panel on Accountancy Education to reflect on the growing demand for accountants to take center stage and mainstream sustainability reporting. After they've done their consultations, they actually published just last month an exposure draft changing already these particular standards for where we now call ourselves as being prepared for that profession. And this actually requires us four things. These revisions for our consideration has now been a topic of discussion in our country and in other parts of the world where accountants and the accountancy profession is now being called to address. Part of that is our capability and our ability to work with experts in a multidisciplinary teams. Why was there such a flood in Dubai last month? How is that going to be reported by organization, businesses in Dubai? Would that not have a financial implication? What are the scenarios that will happen in the future for the values of those companies? We need to work with climatologists and weather experts to understand how that impact is. In fact, IFRS S1 and S2 requires us to have scenario analysis for the impact of weather, disturbance, and even the kind of weather that we are experiencing here. I know that in South Africa, we're supposed to be approaching winter today, but yet our temperature reaches as far as 27, 28 degrees, right? And how would that impact the businesses in South Africa? And these are some of the other things that we consider in this particular framework. So let me just segue into what I actually see as the contribution of accounting to sustainability reporting as well as South Africa. And these are some of the other things that we considered in this particular framework first. So let me just segue into what I actually see as the contribution of accounting to sustainability reporting as well as the achievement of our sustainable development goals. I'll call it first. We contribute our practices. What do we mean by practices? Far from the time that we were counting the agricultural yields in the Mesopotamia, we're now actually transforming our role from bean counters or bookkeepers to gatekeepers of information. And we need to be comfortable with that. Information that's not just financial, but also sustainable or sustainability information. We see that one of our expertise is for us to have that kind of training to gather, to classify, to analyze, and report data. We call that initially as financial data, right? But as keepers of sustainable information, we're here to contribute to the quality of those information. When you talk about quality, integrity of the data, reliability of the data, and of course, auditability of the data is very important. As accountants and gatekeepers of financial and sustainable information, we also try to draw the connection and integration of financial information and try to understand how this affects the companies or organizations that we are actually reporting on. Furthermore, it helps us inside the company by aligning all of this sustainable information and analysis with our strategies as a business, making it more relevant to the different stakeholders, including investors, organizations in our strategy, the business model, and likewise enterprise value. At the end of the day, with the accountant's expertise in data management and data management systems, we are actually adding credibility to these reports. In fact, that's actually one of the greater contribution of accountants to this reporting, which has been there since the 1980s and the 1990s. We have been accused of greenwashing, and I know that has been part of our conversation. But with the accountants coming in with this kind of professional expertise, we are now able to go beyond what this report will have for its stakeholders. I present to you the state of play in terms of sustainable reporting and assurance. This is the latest, This is the latest status given by the International Federation of Accountants in a joint project with CIMA and AICPA. One of the things that I want you to see here is that there seems to be a growth in terms of focus on sustainability reporting and assurance. Part of that is, for the last 4 years, we see more and more companies are actually preparing ESG reports using information. In fact, globally, at least among the surveyed nations, it rose from 91 to 98% in the last 4 years. Now, most of these companies are now in a quandary because their jurisdictions are mandating them to do this kind of reporting. But others continue to do that in a voluntary manner. In our country, for example, before the pandemic, we are now requiring all publicly listed companies and banks to prepare annually and submit sustainability reports. We are not yet requiring them to have them assured, but that is going to change soon when the coming of ISA 5000 and similar standards being adopted. On the other hand, my question is, having seen that this is actually how companies have been addressing the sustainability challenge, how many accountants are really involved in the preparation and in the assurance of ESG? For the longest time, I have friends who are non-accountants who are actually doing the report, and most of them are non-accountants. So the question is, with our strength and practice as accountants are we taking that particular high road to re-examine our competency, to upskill ourselves, and participate here. IFAC, PAEB actually said this once, that accountants are central to enabling finance, assessing business cases, and even managing the balance sheet to deliver adequate investment toward the best initiative, at the same time ensuring financial resilience during a transition to a business becoming sustainable. I think that's a tall order for us to see that our practices is one of the things that we contribute to sustainability reporting. But the second thing that I see is this. We also contribute our paradigm and perspective as accountants. As accountants, we are champions of what we call the integrated mindset, meaning we take a look at risk and from the same lens, the opportunities that we can actually gain out of those challenges that we face. In fact, Deloitte once said that this is actually where the 4 phases of a finance function will go in the coming decade. And that is the role of being a catalyst, where we execute the plans, being a strategist, where we take a look at performance indicators and define them, being a steward, where we take a look at control systems and design them, and being an operator, where efficiency becomes the norm. Questions that we are always asked are, what value is being created by organizations? And what is the organization's contribution to sustainability and likewise society? We are also becoming more a business and a value partner for our organization. We drive and improve understanding of how value is created to enhance decision-making and actions by the board and management alike. We use business models as a way for us to define our strategies, sustainable strategies, transform us, purpose, culture, and even governance and risk. Our paradigms as a steward likewise focuses us and the organization that we belong to on its most significant sustainability impact related to how we carry out our operation and strategize. In fact, most businesses will actually say that they would want to become net zero. And net zero is an ambition. Accountants are there to help them make that particular trends, incorporated them in the business model to allow them to meet the target. UN SDG is supposed to be achieved by 2030. And that's 5 years and 7 months from now. Are we near achieving those SDGs? And I think as accountants, we can account, we can report, monitor, and in the process communicate. And in the process of communicating, maybe encourage more and more people to join in and contribute here. So it's not just our practices and not just our paradigms and perspective, but it also is the way we are. I like this because a few decades ago, Warren Buffett said that accounting is the language of business. Do you agree? But as in any language, it has to find relevance, right? In fact, as a language of business, we get familiar with the concept of profit. Before accounting came, there was no such thing as profit. There were just excesses, right? But maybe as a language, we need to make the language more alive. And I guess part of that conversation is our paradigm to create new words that will define what sustainability is for us, right? Integrated mindsets, triple bottom line, or 4 Ps now. These are some of the things that we can actually do as part of our perspective. But the last 2 are just simple. This actually includes the principles and the standards that we develop and we enjoin others to consider us in our journey. Because having one set of standards like ISSB S1 and S2 will help us now have a more coherent platform for reporting and later on for getting assurance done. This is our contribution. But don't forget the most important. I think as accountants globally, this is one of the things that we are called. That is to abide by our professional principles of our code of ethics. This is our call. If you take a look at what ISBA has actually given us, it talks to us about how accountants can add value through the sustainability reporting and assurance that we are actually facing right now. This includes integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, and likewise independence. Now, no other profession that I know can add these ethical standards and keep it and come up with the reporting that is factual, that is more objective, and yet that accounts for actions done and aspirations that are yet to happen. These four practices, paradigms, principles, and perhaps the professional code of ethics are the things that we contribute as accountants to this particular discussion. I'd like to say this, though, that accountants would monitor, report, make assurances for the organization's commitments, performance, and even aspirations to the SDGs. Accountants indeed play a very, very crucial role in sustainability reporting. Our expertise in data management, integration of financial and non-financial information, stakeholder communication and engagement, and likewise risk management and governance are key contributors to the achievement of these SDGs. And by ensuring the accuracy, perhaps, transparency and accountability of sustainability reports, accountants help organizations build trust with stakeholders, and this drives long-term value creation. In the process of creating value, we contribute to the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a business, making our world a better place. Just before I end, I'll just show you some headlines that we see facing our profession. This is actually just a couple of weeks back. There are a lot of news about how there's a shortage of accountants, talents, in not only the US, but globally. In fact, that's something that we address also in our country. There was also a pronouncement that maybe we are going to be extinct soon, given the rate of development and change, and maybe if we don't act. Maybe this is the time for us to really consider that who we are as accountants can actually help us engage, excite, and perhaps encourage the next generation and contribute fully to sustainability in our own way. So thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that the biggest highlight for me in the conversation of what Prof. Uri was saying is about collaboration. That I know most accountants, we are introverts. And we need to start having the character of wanting to collaborate with climatologists, for example, for us to be relevant, for us to make an impact in the things that we need to change. So I hope you are taking notes of the other ideas that you need to incorporate as academics to engage with your students at a very exciting topic to talk about, because we've seen the changes that has happened during COVID as well, that we needed to even adjust ourselves in the way we are doing things. Thank you so much, Prof, for that contribution. Without further ado, we have Prof. Warren. I hope he is ready for us. I'm just going to read his profile. He is a full professor of accounting and auditing in the School of Accountancy at the University of Witwatersrand, and a visiting professor in the University of Exeter in UK, and he's also has earned a Bachelor of Accountancy and Honours of Bachelor in Commerce and Master's Accountancy in degree from the University of Wits again, and he holds a PhD from King's College in London. He is a member of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants and also a board member of the IAASB. A member of the Integrated Reporting Committee of South African Working Group as well. He serves in various committees to just contribute his work as well and insight. He has extensive research which focuses on financial accounting, assurance, corporate governance, integrated reporting, sustainability reporting that he has published as well. And he has earned an NRF rating of B2. I think that's a hand clap. Well, good achievement as well there, very inspiring. In addition, he is an editor or co-editor of several impactful journals out there. So if you don't know him yet, go to Google Scholar and search, and you'll find. Please help me welcome Professor Warren on online stage. He's going to be talking to us about sustainability assurance and IFAC on sustainability assurance according to ISA 5000. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that very warm introduction. And can somebody confirm that you can hear me?
Yes.
Ah, fantastic. And if somebody could just change me to a presenter so that I can share my slides. So while we're waiting for that to happen, thanks very much for the invitation. Barry actually invited me. Barry, I hope you're there somewhere. Apologies that I can't be with all of you in person. I know that these online presentations are never ideal, but I suppose an online presentation is always better than being excluded entirely from a conference in general. So many thanks to Barry and team for hosting me and accommodating the fact that I needed to run the session online. Still waiting for an opportunity to share the slides, so in the interest of not wasting too much time, it's an interesting presentation today because I need to talk to you, I suppose, in a dual capacity. As a person who's been assisting a group of highly dedicated and really, really clever and passionate people write a standard on how we can actually assure ESG information, and at the same time talk to you about the relevance of all of this from an accounting research point of view and talk about our responsibility, our role as researchers and what we can do to assist with the advancement of these sustainable development goals and agendas. I only picked up the tail end of the previous presentation, but it sounds like it's an excellent starting point for my conversation because we have been talking about sustainability reporting, we've been talking about the role of accounting in advancing corporate transparency, in advancing our ability to understand how organizations think about value, how they report value to stakeholders, and of course how different users can use this information to inform their decision making and to sort of allocate capital, financial capital that is more effectively. But all of this is predicated on the assumption that what we are seeing in those corporate reports, irrespective of what they've been labeled, all about a sustainability report or an integrated report or ESG report, doesn't really matter what you call it. Whatever that document is called, all of these wonderful benefits about advancing sustainable development, having more efficient and effective capital allocations, all of this is predicated on the assumption that we can actually generate value, that we can provide useful information only if what's in those reports are valid, accurate, and complete. Now let me just quickly get my slide open. Bear with me for a moment while I navigate All right, so hopefully I'm back and hopefully you can still hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, you see, good news, everybody. It's not just South Africa that tends to have sporadic outages. Although the lights have been staying on, even the UK suffers from an internet glitch every now and again. So there's a bit of good news for us. Anyway, so before I managed to successfully disconnect myself, I was saying that in order for us to be able to take advantage of this sustainability reporting revolution, I suppose. It's all predicated on the assumption that what we actually have is a set of reliable reports. That those reports are necessarily accurate, complete, credible in all material respects. And that then brings into question this issue of assurance. The need, of course, for these reports to be subject to some type of external assurance. And what I'll be talking about in a little bit of detail are the rationales for actually worrying about sustainability reporting and whether or not those sustainability reports should be assured, before taking you through a really brief overview of some of the core features of the proposed standard ISA 5000, having a look at key principles, concepts, definitions, and then, of course, the traditional ingredients of the assurance model, including, of course...
Oh. We were not seeing your slides, but it's all good now. Thanks.
Excellent. So as I said, traditional ingredients of the assurance model, materiality, risk, response, misstatements, and then, of course, the actual report itself. So before we get into the whole discussion about whether or not we should actually have the assurance of these sustainability reports, I suppose we have to talk in some detail about whether or not sustainability reporting is actually relevant from a capital market perspective. And what we already know from the research that's been conducted based on a whole host of different types of field observations is that there has been an exponential increase in sustainability reporting, particularly over the last 10 years. There's some excellent reports that have been produced by IFAC, the Global State of Play, and also by KPMG, which highlights how companies across the world, including the largest global companies, are engaging in at least some type of sustainability reporting. At the same time, we're starting to see the proliferation of regulations and codes of best practice that are dealing with sustainability reporting in a whole host of different forms. It might not have been jurisdiction specific, but a proliferation of different types of international frameworks, broadly speaking, dealing with sustainability reporting. Some common examples, things like the Global Reporting Initiative, the TNFD and the TCFD, a whole host of different acronyms popping up into our acronym soup, dealing with sustainability reporting, even before we started to get into this realm of actually regulating and making sustainability reporting mandatory, like what we are currently seeing in the European Union. Now, those preliminary field observations suggest that what we're dealing with is probably more than just a response to popular culture, probably more than just companies wanting to be politically correct and to do the right thing. And this is based on the premise that preparing these documents costs a considerable amount of money. Now, from a critical research perspective, we often talk about the fact that there's greenwashing, that there's impression management, that there's symbolic display. I'm certainly not being idealistic. I believe that these forces are at work, and I believe that there is a certain element of the so-called greenwashing taking place in the broader sustainability space. But I don't think that greenwashing is the only factor at work, or put differently, the dominant factor at work, because there are probably cheaper and more effective ways to manage impressions than spending millions of dollars every year in maintaining a complex infrastructure to support the preparation of these sustainability reports. It's also really difficult to get your head around the concept of all of these global standard setters, the GRI, the ISSB, the TCFD, all of these organizations somehow being co-opted as part of this greenwashing initiative. I think that just seems to be a little too critical to make a lot of logical sense. So those field observations provide the first support, I suppose, the first source of assurance, to use the term broadly, that we're probably not just dealing with greenwashing when it comes to sustainability reporting and impression management. And that hypothesis has been supported by a whole host of empirical tests that have been carried out by academics also over the last 5 or 6 years in particular. What's really important is that this research has been conducted by academics in different jurisdictions, often working independently of each other, using a host of different methods and different databases, and coming up with relatively consistent conclusions. That better sustainability reporting is associated with lower costs of capital, with lower costs of debt, with improved accuracy of analyst forecasts, with more cash flow stability, and with better measures of earnings quality, irrespective of how those earning quality measures are being defined and calculated. And so that collection of research put together provides additional evidence of the fact that this sustainability reporting that we've been experimenting with over the last 10 years probably has substance, that it has more than just greenwashing in play. And the final piece of evidence that I present to you in support of the assertion that sustainability reporting matters is a host of case studies and analyses which we've been conducting at FITS in collaboration with our various research partners to actually start engaging with different organizations that have been identified as leaders of sustainability reporting to try and understand if there are changes in the internal dynamics of the organization. Now, although we're talking about case studies with relatively small numbers of organizations, the broad principles are probably applicable and can probably be extrapolated or applied to other organizations. But what we've started to notice from these case studies is that where high-quality integrated or sustainability reporting is taking hold, you tend to have material system changes taking place. Companies that are starting to develop a set of general ledgers, if you like, that are capable of doing more than just accumulating rands and cents according to different income and expense accounts. The previous speaker spoke about how we've used accounting to come up with this construction of profit. And what we're starting to see is that those traditional measures of profit at the organizational level are being complemented with a battery of social and environmental performance indicators that are used to complement how they actually measure their accounting profit, how they think about profit. So the expansion of those charts of accounts of the traditional general ledger is not just a record-keeping exercise, it's starting to permeate into the actual systems that are used to manage the organization and then results in a battery of internal controls being put in place as the organization starts to take steps to ensure that that data, that environmental, social, and governance data is valid, accurate, and complete. And that's really important because from an outside perspective, an organization would only want to invest in a system of controls if the underlying matters. If the underlying is irrelevant, if the underlying is really just being used for greenwashing, why would you have controls being put in place to ensure that the data that you're using is valid, accurate, and complete? So that really for us was the final piece of the puzzle that affirmed the view that we're probably dealing here with something a lot more significant than just greenwashing, impression management, woke culture, some of the terminology that I've heard over the last 18 months. We're probably dealing with something that actually matters to capital market participants and to other stakeholders. And that then sets the scene for why it's so particularly important to have assurance in place. Well, obviously, from an outsider's point of view, we have no way of knowing whether that organization's data, processes, and controls are adequately robust. We need an external assurance provider to come in, to engage with that company, to evaluate the risks, to respond to those risks, and to come up with an assurance opinion that allows us, the outside user of that information, to place reliance on the environmental, social, and governance metrics that the company is communicating, irrespective of the reporting format. Now, preliminary research that's been conducted on existing types of assurance being provided over sustainability reports highlights a whole host of associated benefits. As part of that case study work that we've been doing, we've noticed that where companies have been engaging external and internal assurance providers to actually test the nuts and bolts of how their sustainability reports are put together, that their processes and controls tend to be a lot more sophisticated, that they are collecting richer types of data, and by that I mean a mix of qualitative and quantitative information that straddles the environmental, social, and governance pillars that we often hear about when academics talk about their sustainability reporting research. we've started to notice that assurance links to both internal aspects of the organization, in other words, the internal decision-making processes that are taking place, as well as covering features that are linked to the reporting to the external stakeholder. And that's really important, because what that is suggesting, and I say suggesting here because the research is still ongoing, is that the assurance is part of an integrated thinking process. That it's not just about making sure that a particular disclosure is correct, but that the actual thought process that resulted in that disclosure somehow is adequately robust in order to support the conclusion that has been reached. Bearing in mind that a lot of the sustainability-related information being reported is inherently more subjective than traditional financial reporting. In interviews, we've been hearing about how governing bodies feel that assurance is an integral part of discharging their fiduciary duties. What we already know from the King Code of Corporate Governance in South Africa is that our boards of directors and other governing bodies are held to a very high standard in terms of what they are expected to do in directing and guiding the organization's value generation. We know that it's not only about generating financial returns, we know it's about acting as a responsible corporate citizen, and we know that as part of that, in terms of our governance principles, organizations are expected to prepare a sustainability report. In jurisdictions now like the EU, we have a mandatory sustainability reporting regime. A South African entity that is operating in the EU, which is a subsidiary of an EU parent company, may very well find itself falling in the ambit of those mandatory sustainability reporting requirements. Practically, in the absence of external assurance, a governing body has no real way of knowing if the information being reported externally or used internally for decision-making purposes is valid, accurate, and complete. And so the assurance plays a critical role in discharging those fiduciary duties, a key point that's been coming out of the interviews we've been doing so far. Now, that qualitative research, which really describes the first three buckets, is complemented by a battery of quantitative work that's been done by a host of different researchers, both at WITS and at other universities. We've seen an amplification of capital market benefits that are associated with ESG assurance. All of those improved cost of capital, cost of debt, cash flow accuracy forecasts, those benefits tend to be maximized when we find ourselves dealing with or we find an organization rather that has engaged an external assurance provider. And the application of those financial benefits seems to go hand in hand with improved ESG performance. That last one is a little bit tricky because there's a lot of debate about how we can actually measure ESG performance, but as a rule of thumb, we're seeing an improvement both in terms of the organization's financial and capital market benefits and in terms of its ESG performance in cases where an external assurance provider has been appointed. Again, what's really important for those last 2 points is that we've got a host of different researchers, again working independently, using different methodologies, different measures for financial and ESG performance, different measures for assurance, reaching qualitatively similar conclusions that allow us, therefore, to come to the point that sustainability assurance is an integral part of the sustainability reporting process, because sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance are really the end points of an integrated thinking logic, which is hopefully driving how the organization is managing these multiple capitals in order to generate investors, or to generate returns rather for investors and other types of capital providers. Now, it doesn't matter if the organization is preparing a sustainability report using GRI or ESRS or TNFD. Those core principles of integrated thinking, even if the document is not called an integrated report, continue to be relevant and continue to highlight why this type of extra financial reporting and related assurance is not just greenwashing, it's not part of a woke agenda or some type of liberal green movement. It's about adding real, actual material value for real financial capital providers and a whole host of other stakeholders who make our modern capital systems and democratic processes function effectively. So in that context, we ask ourselves, what exactly is the IAASB doing as part of this initiative to drive ESG assurance? Well, currently, we find ourselves in a situation where organizations are predominantly using ISAE 3000 to guide how they actually have their sustainability reports assured, and they engage an external assurance provider, typically a conventional audit firm, in order to perform these particular engagements. Other types of standards are, however, also being applied. ISAE 3410 deals specifically with greenhouse gas emissions. It's a really common assurance standard which a person will encounter when they work through a sustainability report. But similar to the proliferation of sustainability reporting standards, assurance standards also started to proliferate. We've seen AA1000 AS come into the marketplace, and we've seen a battery of ISO standards being developed. There's also been a whole host of sort of custom and proprietary standards being developed by certain organizations claiming to provide assurance, in inverted commas, over the sustainability reports. This, in other words, has created a situation where assurance has become fragmented. There is a whole host of different standards that are defining assurance differently, making it very difficult for users to understand what exactly is the opinion on that particular information and how much comfort can I take from it. So the goal here was to create a baseline for sustainability assurance, a response to timely developments in the sustainability reporting space, and to build on the existing requirements in existing assurance methodologies that have become well established in the marketplace to give us ISO 5000, a document which is an overarching standard providing the blueprints for how we could go about assuring a sustainability report, but at the same time allowing sufficient flexibility to complement 5000 with more topic-specific guidance as the sustainability assurance market matures, the needs of investors and other stakeholders become more apparent. So the objective of ISO 5000 is really to cover a whole host of sustainability-related topics. Unlike previous sustainability assurance standards, for example 3410, which deals specifically with greenhouse gas emissions, this particular standard deals with the environmental, the social, and the governance aspects concurrently.
Prof.
And importantly, the standard is...
Sorry to interrupt you. We have some extra screen showing. Can you just check for us if it's not on your side? Internet, there you go. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. I think it's just some sort of news blog that's popped up. Has it disappeared?
Yes.
Excellent. Hopefully that news blog wasn't more interesting than the guidance on ISO 5000. So as I was saying, it covers a whole range of sustainability topics. It's not specific only to greenhouse gas emissions, and is also designed to deal with a full range of disclosures, be it qualitative or quantitative. It's not limited to only monetary information. Non-monetary disclosures and qualitative disclosures can also be applied. It's designed to deal with the full range of reporting mechanisms. So again, whether the document is called a sustainability report, an integrated report, a value-adding report, all of those reporting platforms are captured by the guidance provided in ISO 5000 that really offers us that overarching standard, an overarching basis for thinking about how a practitioner can provide assurance over the sustainability information. Because it's covering a whole host of reporting platforms, it's designed to be standard neutral. In other words, it's not designed to be used in conjunction with only GRI or only the European standards. An organization using any sustainability reporting standard or even a combination of reporting standards could very well find itself in a situation where ISO 5000 is applicable. And as a result of this, the assurance standard is designed to cater to the information needs of a whole host of users and stakeholders, reflecting this debate that we've seen taking place at the moment about whether or not we should be preparing financial statements or rather sustainability reports, thinking about the financial implications of environmental, social, and governance metrics, the so-called financial materiality logic, or whether we should be thinking more broadly about financial implications and at the same time the way the organization impacts society and the environment, the so-called double materiality logic. So there was a clear need to ensure that this assurance standard was sufficiently flexible to capture both types of reporting regimes. At a more technical level, 5000 is designed to provide both limited and reasonable for the audit technical people sitting in the room. It's designed to be used by all assurance practitioners and not just your traditional audit firm. And very importantly, a standalone document A person wanting to conduct an assurance engagement using 5000 is not limited or is not required to use other standards to complement the provisions of 5000. 5000 is a single package that is used independently to provide assurance, something which we think speaks to the efficiency and broad applicability of the proposed standard or exposure draft. And of course, it builds on the relevant quality management and ethics requirements. The first speaker spoke about those fundamental principles in the ISPA code. Those reform the basis of the sustainability assurance engagement under 5000, as does the requirement to ensure an overarching quality control framework and culture in play. So to touch very briefly on some of the key principles, concepts and definitions, those sustainability reporting frameworks which we've been referring to, the GRI, the TNFD, the European standards, these provide the base criteria, the ingredients, if you like, according to which the sustainability report is prepared. In practical terms, and I'm sure Neil will go into this in a lot more detail, organizations are probably going to develop a whole host of entity-specific criteria which allow us to complement that framework, the external criteria, and come up very broadly with a set of sustainability accounting policies, for want of a better term, that allows them to prepare the sustainability information as a whole. From an assurance provider's point of view, that sustainability information can be broken down into a set of sustainability matters, topics and aspects of topics. So, for example, things like climate change, labor, biodiversity, and specific aspects of those topics, like performance indicators, risks and rewards, responses and opportunities, systems, controls, and so on. So the sustainability matters are broken down, if you like, into bite-sized pieces of information guided by the reporting framework, guided by the entity's sustainability accounting policies, guided by the information needs of the users, and a bit of common sense, to give us those units of information which the practitioner goes through a process of then assessing for risk and responding to that risk in the traditional way. So we still end up with a host of sustainability disclosures, which are a reflection of topics and aspects of topics, all guided by the sustainability criteria, and those disclosures can then be assessed for risks of material misstatement in the conventional way. Do we assess those risks as sort of a low, medium, and high, according to some type of spectrum? And then how do we respond to those risks using combinations of tests of details and test of controls based on the scope of the engagement and the level of assurance which you're actually trying to provide? So remember that we could be providing an assurance engagement on specific disclosures, which is what we're currently seeing in practice, or we could find ourselves in a situation where eventually the report as a whole is eventually the subject of assurance, and we end up with the type of fair presentation statement being made with regards to the sustainability information in its totality. The standard is also, as I've said, designed to cater for both limited and reasonable assurance, so a conclusion in the positive form or in the negative form, where obviously the work effort would be scaled accordingly. So substantially more work required for a reasonable assurance engagement than would be the case for a limited assurance engagement. Materiality is a key feature that underpins this entire process, and as I've said, we've been very cautious about the need to cater for double materiality, both in terms of understanding the criteria and how the actual sustainability report has been put together by management, and at the same time also wanting to understand materiality when it comes to assessing risk and responding to risk from the practitioner's perspective. So a clear differentiation then between materiality as it's examined from management's perspective and materiality as it's examined from the practitioner's perspective. Qualitative and quantitative information needing to be considered when evaluating materiality, and thinking about specific disclosures versus the sustainability report as a whole. Of course, all of this is subject to professional judgment, which is one of those key features of the assurance engagement, and probably when it comes to sustainability reporting, even more important than when we're dealing with traditional financial reporting requirements. Certain other key aspects include an understanding of the entity and its environment. We've built extensively on the existing methodologies in ISO 315 and ISAE 3000 to provide a base according to which a person understands the entity And we thought that it was very important to build on existing principles and logics because that assists with the application and understandability of 5,000 by assurance and other practitioners. The scaling for limited and reasonable assurance we've spoken about already, and the standard includes additional guidance on overall responses and additional procedures that will be carried out as facts and circumstances indicate that the risk of material misstatement begins to increase or tends towards the upper level. We've provided guidance on test of controls, and interestingly, cater for test of controls in both a limited and reasonable assurance context. And we've also provided guidance for estimates and forward-looking information, given the significant role that this type of data or information plays in a sustainability reporting context. Of course, communication with those charged with governance, TCWG, is a key feature of the assurance process. The assurance engagement results in extensive communication with management and the governing body. Traditional aspects of reporting include, for example, the risk of fraud, non-compliance with laws and regulations, control deficiencies, again building on what we already know in terms of the existing assurance methodologies, guidelines, and processes. The assurance report culminates in something very similar to what we see in 3000 and 3410, where the practitioner provides an opinion either on specific disclosures or on the sustainability report as a whole. Now, this standard has been developed at breakneck speed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a compromise on due process and quality. On the contrary, there's been extensive global outreach as part of this broader, as part of the broader assurance process, specifically focusing on raising awareness and engaging with key stakeholders on key features of the standard. So taking us then back to the research, it sort of begs the question about, so if the IAASB has taken these steps and has developed an assurance standard, what can we as researchers do as part of this process? Well, as far as the research goes, I think that there's probably an urgent need to understand better how practitioners actually think about risk assessments and gauging risks of material misstatements, and how those principles can be applied in a non-financial reporting environment. As part of that, we probably need to focus extensively on the type of training we need to expose our students to. Traditionally, we've told our students about assessing risks and performing traditional audit-type procedures over financial information. But how do we take those principles and start weaving them into classrooms when it comes to dealing with certain non-financial information? Can we as researchers think of new types of audit procedures that could be performed to tackle the very rich type of data that we expect to find in a traditional sustainability report? Can we borrow on principles from research methods, for example, to complement what we already know about substantive tests and test of controls and provide practical guidance for stakeholders? How do we deal with groups in the context of ESG assurance? We haven't gone into the technical details of ISO 5000, but understanding how groups are being defined and implemented in the context of sustainability reporting is a particularly interesting one. Do traditional consolidation processes apply? Do we need to think about groups beyond a value chain? How do we reconcile the group as a legal entity to the group as a value chain construct? Researchers have an opportunity to add significant value by answering these types of questions. What really is the difference between limited and reasonable assurance is a fourth area for potential research. We often say that limited assurance leads to a lower level of assurance than reasonable, but is there a basis for quantifying that, and are we clear as stakeholders fully understand the difference between limited and reasonable assurance? There's been a significant amount of research undertaken on how stakeholders have internalized and made use of the audit of financial information. Similar work is going to have to be performed to understand how a whole host of users are engaging with the types of reports that are going to be culminating when ISO 5000 becomes effective. Now, you'll be delighted to know that there is a call for papers coming out from Meditari Accounting Research. The call is currently open, and there are two special issues, one designed to inform the work plan of the ISSB, dealing specifically with advances in sustainability reporting, and the second to inform the work of the audit standard setter, particularly focused on sustainability assurance, but also on assurance more generally. The links to the special issue webpage are provided on this slide. I'm also happy to make them available to Barry and other colleagues in the room if anybody is interested. You'll also find useful information on the IAAER and IAASB web pages to deal with the special issue, and of course to also obtain additional information on the reporting developments that have been taking place and the relevant assurance requirements. Then the traditional Follow Us page for the IAASB is provided for completeness before pausing and taking any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Warren. At this point in time, we're going to go to the last speaker of the day, and then we'll open up for questions and comments towards the end. So if you can just be patient with us, and then we'll share those questions and comments that were made by the attendees as well. I think that was a very interesting, let's give him a hand clap. Thank you so much. I think from his conversation, this should be second nature to accountants because it allows us to report in a certain framework, but also an opportunity for us to find different ways of how this framework can look like so that we can give advice to the entities that need to share and how they contribute to the sustainability developmental goals. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Morris. I actually said in the morning Prof, because there's all professors this morning. He is a chartered accountant. He has been a KPMG Global Head of Assurance and ESG Methodology since 2021. He was appointed to the International and Assurance Board in January 2023. Also a member of the task force team there as well for the ESA 5000. He has worked in sustainability assurance since his appointment as the head of climate change and sustainability practice in South Africa in 2010. And then in 2017, he was appointed as the KPMG head of audit, risk management, and continued to deliver on sustainability assurance engagement. He has been involved in different sectors, especially in the financial sectors, working with well-known banks as well, like your Investec, Nedbank, Standard Bank. He's also head of audit risk, as I've indicated before, and Neil was a system of quality management for lead for KPMG and is responsible for implementing the new standard of ISQM1 across South African offices before his secondment to the KPMG International. He was a member of the South African Integrated Reporting Working Group, responsible for drafting the discussion paper Framework for Integrated Reporting and Integrated Report. He's a past chairperson of the Integrated Reporting Council, Assurance Technical Collaboration Group, and a past chairperson of South African Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors, which is IRBA, and Sustainable Standing Committee. He has a vast experience. Sure, I wish I could take some. Can you give me some? Can we give him a hand clap as he's going to talk to us about practitioners' insight into sustainability reporting. Mr. Morris, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and I really appreciate you having me here this morning. Being at a university is an uncommon place for me. Since my graduation, after the first speaker, this is now the longest period of time I've spent in a lecture hall. In fact, it's probably the longest period of time I've spent in a lecture hall completely. So I really am out of my depth. When I received the order, and I just needed to refer back to it, I saw the first presenter was a doctor, the second presenter was a professor, The third person is a professor. I think we've just had Warren. Then it's some random guy called Neil with no real education, followed by a professor, followed by a doctor. And it was at that point in time that I realized I was most likely in the wrong venue. But nonetheless, we're going to soldier on, and hopefully there's something that I can share with you about the experiences that I have in the profession that you'll find of some value. Now, first of all, it's just so important that we have these types of conversations. And also, I'm glad to report I have no slides, and there'll be no technical failure on my part during this delivery. I also noted when I arrived I was the only one of the presenters without a tie, but fortunately Warren turned up in his golf shirt and I've managed to sort of get a normal status quo. I do know Warren fairly well. We worked together on the development of ISO 5000, so I feel comfortable sort of having a quick jab. But going back to the importance of these conversations, so we are in a state of play at the moment where the reporting frameworks themselves are evolving really quickly. The assurance standards, as you heard from Warren, those too are evolving really quickly. Users' expectations are about to hit an all-time high, and regulation itself is coming to step in. And so in this period of rapid change, it's really crucial that these types of conversations are held to manage everyone's expectations. And that's expectations between, from my perspective, myself and my client. Perhaps it's with my regulator and with you as educators in terms of what the profession needs to be able to deliver the services. And these expectations gaps will exist throughout the value chain, and it's only through these repetitive conversations that we'll manage to close those gaps down. 2 weeks ago, I attended the KPMG Global Heads of Audit meeting, where the leader from each of the member firms from about 150 countries all descend into a single location. And aside from AI and ESG being the primary hottest topics on the agenda, and I'm going to come back to both AI and ESG, the thing that stood out for me the most was a guest speaker who was a German audit committee member. And what he highlighted was the importance of us engaging in conversations, exactly like the ones that we are having today. And so it kind of comes back to that first point around we need to be able to converse. We have to have these discussions to facilitate this flow of information from these different perspectives. Now, I've prepared some notes, which is fortunate, and there are a number of messages that I'd like to share with you. And if there are other things that you'd like to hear from me, I'm welcome to take whatever questions you have. But it wouldn't be a conversation without your involvement. It becomes one directional in a presentation, and you will leave here unfulfilled. So do engage. I'd be very willing to take questions, comments, even interrupt as I present. There are a few messages that I'd like to share. And the first one relates to this changing environment in which we are operating, and particularly from an assurance perspective. And I want to touch on what that environment feels like to me as a practitioner. Secondly, I think Warren drew on it in terms of what research might be needed. This is very definitely an area where I think there's a significant expectation gap, and that's around limited assurance. And I want to talk about that a little bit more generally. Thirdly, I'll give you a bit of a feel for where I see errors occurring as we go through our assurance processes. What are those? What do they look like? Where do they come from? And then lastly, I want to talk about resourcing, and I want to touch on what our delivery model looks like. And that's going to be driven, I'll kind of, won't let the secret last too long, that's driven by people. that are highly educated, that come from institutions like this. Our delivery model is still critically dependent on that. So let's get started with the changing reporting and assurance environment in which we are operating in. ISO 3000 was last updated 10 years ago, and it was effective in 2015. And that's been a good standard. Right? It's provided a solid foundation, and especially to those practitioners that have had experience in using the standard for a number of years and delivering these ESG sustainability type engagements. But we know it's got some gaps in it. But experience is an amazing thing. Experience allows you to fill in where the gaps are. Experience informs your judgment, and it's that experience that allows them to use this standard in a robust, high-quality manner. We also saw in 2021 the extended external reporting guidance that was released by the IAASB. That was really useful. I mean, that touched on a number of areas that clarified some important points. And I certainly regularly refer back to that guidance. But sustainability reporting is changing. It's not what it was before. The reporting frameworks that we spoke about, the ISSB that you've heard from, and the ESRSs, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. It's a comprehensive set of 12 standards. And I just, for reference, when I talk about significant driving factors and forces, a lot of it will be driven through European responsibilities, legislation, and standards. Also, when I talk about KPMG, although I am a partner of KPMG in South Africa, I work for KPMG International, and so my experiences that I'll share with you will be reflective of a global view rather than necessarily just a local view. But the reporting frameworks have evolved, and no longer are we just cherry-picking some indicators to report on, and there's a requirement to provide disclosures across the full spectrum of that framework. And that's a significant change. The regulatory environment is a significant change. The needs of the users has changed significantly. This has driven the desire for something like ISSA 5000 to be able to really give more robust guidance. The number of professionals in our profession that will be delivering these types of services is going to move from a niche group of individuals with experience that can tolerate gaps in guidance to a broad spectrum. We would look to educate close to 98,000 individuals in our organizations that should be delivering ESG-related assurance over the next few years. That's the level of education that we're needing within KPMG. We have over 250,000 individuals in our firm, and we'll draw from those specialists as well as we deliver assurance work. So since I began delivering assurance over sustainability information, which was back in 2010, it was a slightly interesting story because I was in my office minding my own business. I worked in an audit technical department, and I felt the shadow of people behind me. And when I turned around, there were 3 very senior partners standing in my doorway. I think we would call them in this area doctors, but they were just partners to you and I. And they were standing there, and I knew that something was about to happen. And they asked if I would go and lead our climate change and sustainability practice. And there were 2 things that struck me immediately. First of all, I didn't know that the climate was changing, so that was the first sort of shock factor. And that we actually had a business unit that was delivering climate change and sustainability services. And what we did from the late 90s is that we were focused on, in particular in South Africa, in the mining sector, auditing environmental closure costing. It's one of the biggest liabilities that sits on the balance sheets, and so we had environmentalists that were helping try and determine whether those liabilities were appropriately stated. And it was from there that we got drawn into things like water use licenses, pollution, health and safety, and so it evolved from there. But since 2010, the use of our reports has moved on. We feel that those reports might have got a company an extra point in an ESG rating system, perhaps the Carbon Disclosure Project. If you had GHG assurance, you got an extra point in that rating process. And now we are genuinely providing really robust assurance over this ESG information. This information is driving significant decisions. It's influencing where people invest. It's influencing where people choose to work. It's influencing where you may choose choose to buy, and it influences where corporates choose to buy. It's starting to begin to change supply chains, and so the use of these reports has a far greater impact. And it's because of this changing environment that comparatives to previous years, it's just no longer appropriate. We can't compare to what we did last year from an assurance hours perspective. We cannot compare ourselves in terms of what's appropriate in terms of assurance quality, and we don't compare in terms of price. The comparative to the prior year is no longer a benchmark. It's just the world in which we're operating in has evolved significantly. So in my role at the IAASB, working with Warren and others, we held a series of roundtable discussions, and I think those discussions were on every continent except Antarctica, which is a little ironic since that's the one continent that will probably have the highest impact the earliest. But nonetheless, we spoke to a variety of stakeholders, be they preparers, be they assurance practitioners, be they academics, regulators, standard setters, you name it. We spoke to stakeholders around the world. There was one message that I certainly took, and that is that more is expected from auditors. At no point in time did anyone say to me, "Oh, can we please have more of the same?" That definitely wasn't the message. And I think as we consider how ESG information is going to become the watermark of what we do, each of us needs to reflect that actually what we've done in the past is no longer going to be appropriate, whether that's in education, whether that's in preparation, whether it's in assurance or your daily behaviors. We know that high quality assurance is a key driver in improving the disclosures. And we know that improved disclosures will lead to better decision making. And better decision making in terms of environmental, social, and governance matters has got to be in the protection of the public interest, and that is fundamentally what we are here to do as auditors. Let me move now on to the second area that I wanted to talk through, and let's talk about limited versus reasonable assurance, and I know that Warren touched on it briefly. But the reason for limited assurance being requested often relates to a budget. It relates to a timeline. It'll be less time. Maybe the preparer has lower confidence in terms of the information that they'll be providing. And all of these are reasons that do exist, but really those aren't the valid reasons. The reasons you would need limited assurance is because the needs of the users are considered. And the users themselves have considered that limited assurance is sufficient for their purposes. And so the starting point of why we're asking for limited assurance needs to be somewhat realigned. Currently, we are seeing legislation, particularly in Europe, and Europe is going to be driving 50,000 organizations to report in terms of those ESRS standards, and then have assurance, firstly limited assurance required beginning this December, followed by the non-public interest entities next year. And so there's a significant uptick in the disclosure as well as the assurance requirements. And so what we're seeing is initially the legislation asking for limited assurance, and then that evolves into reasonable assurance. And I think that the evolution from limited to reasonable assurance is appropriate. I think it's ultimately we would be seeing that this information will be treated similar to financial information, and that reasonable assurance will become the standard over all ESG disclosures. And so when I now talk through as an individual who develops methodologies and technologies, what I can tell you is that we build our methodology on the basis that this evolution will occur. And so when we develop our methodology, we take this evolution into account so that we can more easily transition our work from one year to the next as it evolves from limited to reasonable assurance. A key piece here around limited assurance is determining the extent of procedures, which requires a significant amount of judgment in a limited assurance engagement. And that judgment requires experience. And at the moment, the number of individuals that have that experience is a small group that are going to need to grow. If you don't have experience, then judgment becomes a good guess, an educated guess at best. And so that needs some patience as we all start getting some of that experience. I mean, often I wonder when I look back at our engagement, I think, what more would we have done if I was going to be providing reasonable assurance? And I feel that we've gone with your typical sort of auditor accountant mindset. We've been quite conservative. We've checked as much as we can. And we're probably pretty close to the reasonable assurance line. Other times I do get called in, things haven't necessarily gone according to plan, and it looks as if we're a little bit closer to the inconsequential line. It's been a bit of a light touch, and so this range that limited assurance allows for, I think, can be confusing. So the new assurance standards will provide more structure. They'll drive quality, consistency, but ultimately the biggest driver of work effort is how you identify, what risks you identify, and how you choose to respond to them. There's no amount of structure in those standards that will derive that. And so it is still left in the hands of the engagement teams to determine what it is that they will identify and respond to. And so significant judgment still sits in that middle there. So I think the range is confusing in limited assurance. If it's difficult for a practitioner to actually decide what procedures to perform, what risks they've identified and how they respond, are we really sure that a user of these reports can read the report, see some summarized procedures, and then determine the extent of assurance they can derive from that report? And that's why I think this evolution to reasonable assurance is appropriate, and as it matures, we'll see that we'll get a tighter lock-in from an assurance perspective, and so this information will be treated more similarly to audited information. I mean, one thing I want to put to rest is from time to time I hear that limited assurance is very similar to a review, and it's just not the case. A review is, it's 6 months ago you were there, you did an audit. And so you have an audit base, you have audited information as a comparative, you have an audit level of understanding of the organization before you even begin this work. And a limited assurance engagement doesn't have that. You don't have an audit base, you don't have an audit level of understanding, and so it is more robust than what you would do in performing just a review from an audit perspective. And expecting that you're going to perform particularly full scope, so assurance over the whole report, expecting that would be similar to a review, I think you're going to either be left short in terms of the quality that gets delivered, or you're going to be left short in terms of the profits that you make from that engagement. We're going to have a number of new users of these sustainability reports in the future. And those new users are most likely coming from a financial reporting type background, and so they're probably familiar with audit reports. And an audit report is reasonable assurance. And naturally, I think there's going to be this expectation that if you see an assurance provider's report, that you can derive the same level of assurance. And so I think this limited versus reasonable assurance, interesting place to research, really a key area where there are expectation gaps that exist for sure. I think there's a concern that people's expectations are too high in the near term, and then they're not going to be met. And that for me is a concern. We have to be really realistic about the quality of the information, particularly in these first years when something like the European standards haven't been reported on yet, and they're requiring information from an incredibly broad spectrum. including information out of the value chain. And so we've got to be realistic about the quality of the information that will be prepared and the level of assurance that you can actually derive once it has been assured. But nonetheless, we really need to be ambitious about our end goals, but we do need to be realistic about the extent of work, education, experience required before this matures and gets to where we're wanting to get to. It could be a little messy to begin with, right? I mean, we have a brand new reporting framework. It's never been reported on before. I can't imagine for a moment that everyone's going to get it done perfectly. So we're going to be a little messy. You're going to see some modified reports. And we need to make sure that everyone has a level of expectation and understanding about the quality of this information and what these assurance reports actually mean. So talking about modifications and potential modifications, let me talk about where I think the errors, or where they do occur, and maybe where I see some of them occurring. So, I mean, in the initial years, when the regulation now requires that the whole report needs to be assured, or the report needs to be prepared covering the whole framework, and assurance over the whole report is then required. This is very different to where we are today. So organizations cherry pick information to be able to present it, and they cherry pick which of that information might be assured. And if you run into a difficulty, you say, well, let's not share that information, and they'll withdraw it from the report and remove it from the scope of the engagement. And so the number of modifications you actually see in the public domain related to this information is quite low. But that's going to change now that the company has to report in terms of the regulatory requirements. And the scope of the assurance cannot be adjusted, and so the only way out is to then disclose where those modifications might be. So if I think about the first place, I think the first one would be fundamental around just determining what we should be reporting. So from a European perspective, we call this a double materiality process. And this has become the priority assessment of determining what information is in fact material and should be included in the report and ultimately then would be assured. And so without this information being able to compare to the prior year, to a peer, to an industry standard, to some form of norm, the first year really is a bit of a stab in the dark. And I think two things are going to happen. We're either going to find that the material topics included might be incomplete, or the material topics would be overly complete and really distract from other information, and there'll be a lot of noise in the system. And so my first call of area of potential misstatement would be around just determining what it is that should be included in the report for this to be a comprehensive report in terms of the framework requirements. The next one, Warren called it out. He said, I'm sure Neil will tell you about suitability of criteria. Absolutely. Next on my list is suitability of criteria. And to me, determining the suitability of criteria is where an engagement has the potential to unravel. And although we have these new fancy frameworks that have got far more robust criteria, there's still a significant amount of criteria which is dependent on the organization. The criteria, the frameworks, they're not as mature as the financial reporting frameworks developed over, was it 150, 100 something years, right? And so because we don't have that history, the criteria themselves are still left in the hands of the preparer. I had an example once where I went to a client, and surprisingly it was a bank, and they asked if I'd provide assurance over the number of online banking customers. I said, sure, that seems easy enough. I can definitely provide assurance over the number of online banking customers. And this was important because one of the strategies was around their branch management. And obviously the more online customers you have, maybe the less branches you need, and this was a critical sort of change in the way the organization was being run. And so off I went, embarked on providing assurance over the number of online customers, and the first question that occurred to me was, well, what is an online customer? It seems so obvious when they asked me. And so when I asked the question, what's an online banking customer, I was met with somewhat silence. And it turns out the guy that gave the number, he was down in a basement somewhere, and he provided the number through to the board, I'll have you know, but this was just dependent on what he felt like on any given month. And there was no definition of what an online customer was. Did it mean they transacted once on their phone? Did they have to go into the internet? If they had been transacting on the internet for 3 months, but then one day they popped into the branch, do they stop being an online customer? And suddenly these questions, we realized that we weren't quite sure. And so you'll see that criteria, if it's as complex as that, just for determining what an online banking customer is, which would be familiar to all of you, how much more complicated does it get to when you talk about biodiversity and you talk about water consumption and all these other factors that align there. And so the suitable criteria for me is going to be a key determinant of this information, whether it's misstated, whether it carries bias. The interesting thing, and Warren will know that I would have to say this, the interesting thing is we are asking the auditor to determine whether the criteria are suitable as a precondition. This means you need to determine whether it's suitable before you even begin the engagement, before you've even been hired, before you can send them an invoice. You need to have done all this work. And so because there's still uncertainty as to whether you'll be appointed, there's a tendency for the auditors to do this superficially at first. Be appointed, be accepted, and now when we start gathering the evidence to say, show me the online customers, we realize we have a problem, and that's then where the modification comes in, because you're too far gone to be able to unwind it. Systems, processes, and controls. Let's touch on that. So it's common knowledge that the systems, processes, and controls relating to ESG information, it's just not as mature as what you see in a financial reporting environment. And without systems, processes, and controls, the quality and completeness of the information will be skeptical, right? So ESG does not have a double entry journal system, right? When you have emissions and they get sent up into the air, there is no goods received note that comes back down. And so the completeness of the information is entirely dependent on the systems, processes, and controls of you seeing it at the time. If I was to trip and fall on my way out, if I didn't report it, how would we know? And so health and safety becomes a mindset as to whether it's being reported appropriately or not. And so completeness is always a risk. And now the frameworks are asking for information to be also reported outside of the organizational boundary in the value chain, and so you can only imagine that completeness becomes more of a risk. And so this is an area of significant professional judgment, skepticism, and it's going to be really truly tested when determining what is the extent of evidence that I need to be able to justify this. When you think of things, sustainability information is generally about, have you reported all of it? Did you report all of your carbon emissions? All of your water consumption, all of your health and safety, all of your pollution. It's a question of completeness. Sometimes there's existence. You've overstated the number of women in leadership. Do they actually all exist? But those are exceptions. It's generally about understating to improve the position of your reporting. Interestingly, units of measure. So because of the unfamiliarity of the unit of measure, now there's often lots of discussion about, do we have sufficient specialists? And the answer quite quickly is no, right? We do not have access to sufficient specialists in all of these areas. And I'll talk through about how this. And as much as I truly derive huge value from the engineers, the environmentalists, the environmental scientists, the social scientists that sit in my team, the biggest areas that we actually find is sometimes just around the unit of measure, because it's unfamiliar and we're working in a manual environment. And so it's not the complicated areas that create the biggest misstatements. It seems like something was reported in thousands rather than tens of thousands. It's liters versus megaliters. It's kilowatts versus megawatts. It's carbon per ton versus per kilogram. And given the manual spreadsheeting environment and the unfamiliarity, we just don't see it. Our eye doesn't catch it. And though accountants are number-based people, we're not familiar with the numbers, in fact, that we're seeing, and so it takes real care in both preparation and assurance, because these are some of the biggest challenges that you'll find. Let me flick over to, in fact, I will touch on the sort of the risk of fraud, and I know that Warren spoke about it. And the one thing that I want to talk about is that the more ESG is regulated and forced upon organizations to report on, it increases the incentives, the opportunities, the rationalization for companies to actually commit fraud in this. The one thing that I have discovered is that the distance from board to sustainability provider is incredibly short. The distance from the board through a very structured financial reporting process and system is a lot more complex. And so we've got individuals that haven't been close to a board before that have now been dragged into strategic type decisions, but they're also the owner of what are the criteria, the management of the information, and ultimately the reporting, and they themselves are the ones that feel this pressure to make sure, because who gave the net zero ambition? It was the CEO in a very public manner, and so they now are quite quickly responsible for the delivery of that. So you've got individuals that are very rapidly rising up to a board type level, feeling a significant amount of pressure, and my sense is that that does drive an increased risk from a fraud perspective. Let me talk about our resourcing model and resourcing our delivery. And before my resourcing message gets lost in the excitement of AI and delivery centers, I want to be absolutely clear that our ability to deliver is still dependent on us having access to well-educated chartered accountants. And that is now also a need that they understand ESG assurance knowledge. So a chartered accountant can't just come in with a financial and audit mindset. They need to understand sustainability frameworks and assurance standards. But we are still teams resourced by chartered accountants, and they are supported by specialists, technologies, and delivery centers, but fundamentally led and delivered by chartered accountants. So the first thing I want to talk about is AI and ESG. Now, as I mentioned recently at our Global Heads of Audit, we had two topics standing out, and that was AI and ESG. And it would be remiss of me to step away from the podium today without talking about AI in some respect. And the excitement of when AI and ESG come together is just something pretty special. Now, the development of AI is happening so rapidly that it would be ignorant of me to try and project where I think it's going to go. But what I can tell you is about what we are currently doing, what it looks like, how teams engage with it, and I can tell you how we're using it in our organization. So the first thing, and I pointed it out when I met this morning, the first thing that I'll highlight is that we deal with confidential information. It's not yet in the public domain, and so our clients' information remains privileged. And so some of the tools that you get to use and experiment with on your phone and your laptop, we just can't use because I've immediately broken our code of conduct. I've breached independence, confidentiality, and I cannot put that information into those types of tools. Also, we have our own proprietary information, and I want our teams to draw from sources to reduce the number of hallucinations that the AI would give back to them. And so we want to be a little bit more in control as to where they're getting their answers from, and so our methodologies and guidance are there to do that. And so for us to do this, to mitigate against these risks, to maintain confidentiality, we have to build our own. Now, we have a multi-billion dollar partnership with Microsoft. Microsoft run their awards programs, and we would be their leading partner in terms of their partnerships that they have. And so it's with Microsoft that we build walled environments for us to be able to run AI solutions. So it's in a private walled environment so that our clients' information remains confidential. We can then house our methodologies, etc., in those environments, and we can then get those answers coming back. So it's a pretty cool space. So in terms of where we are from an AI perspective, there are more solutions already developed in audit than there are in assurance from an ESG assurance perspective, and that's primarily because we've got better audit financial information. We can take it back further. The numbers work better, and the sustainability information is qualitative as well as quantitative, and we just don't have as much history to be able to run it. But what we can do is we can leverage some of those audit solutions pretty quickly into an assurance environment. Now, if you can picture a highway, and I drove from Johannesburg today, so there are a number of lanes. Well, South Africa's got another lane on the inside. We don't have any tools that we're building inside the yellow lane. We follow all the rules in terms of building our tools. So we've got slow lane solutions and we've got fast lane solutions. So a fast lane solution includes things that are like prompts. They summaries, comparisons, it draws from methodologies, guidance, they drive efficiencies, they lower the quality level, they increase quality levels, increase speeds, etc., but they don't actually drive huge amounts of assurance evidence. So those are some of the slow lane solutions. If you think a planning discussion, so the auditing standards, assurance standards say you need to have a planning meeting. Our guidance would say a planning meeting needs to have ABC, and the team would then attach their minutes of their meeting, and immediately when they attach it in the tool comes back and says the minutes of the meeting didn't include the partner, and you haven't highlighted the importance of professional skepticism. You either need to have another meeting, or your minutes haven't accurately reflected the conversation, and so that then comes across, and the team would get immediate feedback as to the quality of information they have. At any point in time when you're on a screen, you can ask it a question: how do I determine materiality? And that'll then go back and find the various materiality considerations for them to talk through. So, those are some of the prompts, the summaries, the guidance. Speaking earlier at IAASB meetings, they are on Zoom calls, they get a transcript. Within an hour after a full day of meeting, I'd have a summarized set of information to share out with the firm around what the topics of conversation were, and so those are some of the things that we would be using. And then we've got slow lane solutions. They tend to have high impact in terms of evidence. And the slow lane solutions, we need to take a little bit more time. We're going to be really dependent on what the output is from an audit or assurance evidence perspective. And we're really going to be dependent on what it looks like. We need to take it a bit slow. We need to test it. We need to evaluate it. We need to make sure we get regulatory clearance on it so that we can do it. But overall, AI should drive the improved quality. Some of the efficiency gains that we make in audit, what we'll do is we'll take whatever capacity we have from those audit teams, and we're going to redirect those teams to then deliver ESG assurance. And so it's not about being more efficient and therefore we need fewer people, but we'll be able to redirect those people into an assurance market to make sure we address an ESG assurance growing market, which at the moment will go from thousands or from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands over a very quick period of time. And so what you'll also see from an audit perspective is we'll move away from a pricing model. We've got prices kind of rate times hours. Rate times hours is no longer reflective, and I spoke about multi-billion-dollar investments with Microsoft. So pricing models now need to incorporate technology delivery as well. The next key thing is around we have an integrated delivery model, and integrated meaning our financial auditor and our sustainability teams, they become one, and they deliver the engagement at the same time, led by the same partner. So there's this integration that occurs. Previously, we would have had discrete sustainability teams. They would come in, they'd do a carbon footprint, they'd sign it up, and off they go. But now the report is comprehensive, and it's the report of the organization as a whole. And you need the understanding of the organization as a whole, and therefore we need an integrated delivery model. And so we'll see more and more integration of our methodologies and technology. The first thing that we did from a methodology and technology point of view is we have as many similarities as possible between audit and assurance. And so that then reduces the learnings of an auditor. And the auditor can arrive and they've got familiarity around what the technology looks and behaves like, and they've got familiarity from how the assurance methodology and the audit methodology works in the same way. And so where we can find commonality, we do. And what we've then been able to do is that these auditors that we are able to transition to be ESG assurance practitioners, instead of them spending time learning things around assurance and assurance technologies, they can focus their time on subject matter, and they can focus learning on ESG subject matters. We would tend to have, as a starting out the gate, 60 up to 100 hours of training requirements before someone can join a team to be able to deliver on it. And so we would hear the profits that everyone's going to make. I can tell you, multi-billion dollars to invest in technology, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours to train individuals to be able to do it. But this is an investment of where we see the profession going, and we would see all chartered accountants needing to be trained up in both accounting, from a financial perspective, the sustainability standards, as well as the audit and assurance standards. And technology will allow them to have the capacity to do that. If we didn't have the technology, they would be overwhelmed with delivery in smaller, unique areas. But the technology will allow them to have a broader spectrum. And so, if I bring us to conclusion, auditors today and tomorrow, they have an incredibly exciting role. It really is. And it gives me goosebumps to just imagine if I was beginning on this journey today, what that future looks like. And by no means do I think for a second that it is extinct. This is a fascinating role that they will have in protecting the public interest. And the level of information that people will be dependent on at the speed at which they will need it is fascinating, and they have got a fundamental role to play. The need to be equipped in state-of-the-art technology. This is not a pencil, paper pushing exercise. So they will have to be equipped in state-of-the-art technology. They have to be able to challenge, they have to be able to interpret, they have to be able to provide insights across a variety of subject matters, starting with financial, across a spectrum of broader reporting, and in some instances down into unique, discrete pieces of information. As we say in our firm, audit is fundamentally back, and the future is bright. And those that come out of your profession have got a terrific career ahead of them. Thank you, and I'm welcome to take whatever questions we may have. Thank you. Sure.
If I can kindly ask our speakers to come forth to be able to address the questions that has come forth from our online. Does anybody in the floor or in the hall have any questions or comments? I can give you guys first preference. Advocates, are you going to be reiterating your questions that you posted something else? Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the presenters. Mine goes to the last speaker. It's just the part that I found glaringly missing, but very important. I've been practically involved in the auditing space in government, so I've been dealing with a lot of regularity audit, efficiency audit, and evaluation audit. What I'm not hearing is the side of the regulatory audit. I'm hearing you in the ESG, but I've asked that question. But I would want to hear you talking about the AI ecosystem, which you have developed, which I've asked a question earlier that will be responded to, insofar as the confluence of regularity auditing, ESG, and also then the assurance side. Because the confluence of these as manifesting from various system owners sometimes create a problem in terms of what you call the opinion on the particular institution insofar as the books are concerned.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that? You can respond to that. Yes.
Is that on?
Yes, it
Can you hear
is.
me? So I may need some clarification on the question that you are raising. First of all, I wanted to just get a sense: is the concern around the regulation that they need to follow, or about the preparation? What's the angle that you're most interested there?
Okay. My interest is as we're looking at AI. Remember, audit covers various perspectives, and one of the issues I constantly raised during my time was it does not help to have a clean audit when the service delivery is not clean. Because it's about service to the people that matters. Hence then in government we introduced then what we call monitoring and evaluation policy, which looked at the high level, all levels of evaluation. Because the current evaluation is implementation audit, it's not impact assessment audit, which is at outcomes level. That's not the debate. The issue now is how do we juxtapose at AI equal Gen AI? How do you ensure that as you are dealing with your war room now, how do you ensure then that the regularity aspect, which seems to have been the doorkeeper in most instances, is also infused together with the impact assessment? Because what we need, more than clean audits, is service delivery. Yeah, of course, with clean audits. So how is your AI war room capturing all this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
She needs to switch off. Yes. Here you go.
Thank you for the clarification. That's really helpful. So the one piece that I would firstly add around the role that we have as an assurance provider, and extending that through to service delivery or ESG performance, is that I wouldn't want to overstate the role that the assurance provider plays. The key for me is that the assurance provider will make sure that the information being presented is accurate as stated, and that robust assurance will lead to the improvement of the information being presented. The improvement of the information being presented should lead to better decision making. The better decision making leads to improved delivery. And so that for me is some of the expectation around, because we audited the information, it isn't going to have an immediate impact in improved performance or in fact service delivery as you've asked about. So that's the first thing. But we do see that extended value chain happening. We do know that before an auditor arrives, there's more care, there's more focus, there's more interest, there's more governance, and we do see better outcomes. But it isn't necessarily the first outcome of the audit. From an AI perspective, it's learning, right? So you ask a question, has it considered that in its response? Maybe not on the day one. And so we would, as users, provide constant feedback so the AI learns. That's not a good response, didn't like it. Yesterday, asked some questions around joint audits. Joint audits is a French thing and a South African banking thing. AI gave me a whole lot of rubbish answers. And I say, where did you get that from? And so they've got to learn. And so do we have it today, right now? Probably not. I would overstate the fact that we have. Will it come? It could. And as long as we help teach it, we will get to those better positions. Hopefully that's addressed some of your questions, but welcome to have further and more if needed.
Probably just there, what would be your advice we're talking about SDGs. I like coming to AU 2063 because it's closer to Africa. What then would be your advice in us as institutions of higher learning, as being solution centers for government, insofar exactly what we're talking about? Because we, as institutions of higher learning, we should be the go-to persons with regards to all these areas. What advice would you give?
So from the SDG perspective, we clearly have education, and we have access to education. And I think one of the fundamental pieces for being able to move this dial so significantly, when I look at an organization like this, an institution like this, it would be about access to education. And once you've got access, you are receiving education that positions you to deliver the highest value possible in your chosen field. And as we look at each of those chosen fields, our field is certainly seeing how ESG can be a watermark in everything that we do, from accounting through to biodiversity. And I'd hope that all institutions, all areas of academia would be looking at how ESG could be a watermark in the way that students leaving this organization would be able to make a contribution, whether that's through the public or the private sector, to be able to move the dial in each of those goals. I worked with one organization, and the lady that was leading at the time was Sanda Ojambo. She is ultimately now, I think, the Deputy Secretary General of the SDGs at the United Nations. And she was the head of sustainability at a company called Safaricom. And I would encourage you to go and have a look at Safaricom. It's a telecommunications company based in Kenya. And this is an example of an organization that has applied their mind as to how they can use their business model to be able to provide access to different things. Instead of saying, well, we just do telecommunications, they've said telecommunications is an avenue, it's an access point to health. And so they would have remote nursing stations that you can use telecommunications to go and get consultations. It's an access point to education. It's an access point, and they've used this to be an access point to getting water, to resolving poverty. And they've looked at it from such a broad perspective, and they're making a huge impact. They work with government. They're 30% owned by government. It's a great example of how a public-private joint partnership in an incredibly profitable organization can really move the dial for society.
All right, thank you so much. A question that was posed in the comments as we wait for other questions is, how do we ensure, I think this will be to Professor Warren, how do we ensure comprehensive ISA 5000 reporting paradigm converges with other energy sustainability standards like ISO standard guiding auditing in terms of treaty provision and the most domestic in the energy space? Professor Warren, I'm not sure if you are online with us. Is he not there? Anybody?
I mean, I'm happy to provide a view. I mean, I won't go into each of the standards, but what we are working really hard at from an ISSA 5000 perspective is that, one, the standard is not just restricted to auditors. It's a standard that can be used by everyone. And so that's the starting point. This isn't an old boys club. We want to get as many people using the standard as possible, so that we're familiar with the assurance standards being provided. But there are going to be some areas where you need a unique, discrete standard or process. And that's then where 5000 allows a practitioner to rely on the work performed by someone else that might have done a certificate, they might have provided assurance in another context. And so that still brings value, and it still positions the practitioner to be able to use that work to then provide assurance over the report as a whole and have this information as inputs that they're able to rely on. So by no means would they not be available for use, but we would look for 5,000 to be that umbrella standard and then rely on work coming from other practitioners elsewhere.
Okay, maybe I can pose this question to Professor Arno. How do you see generative AI being utilized in the internal and external quality assurance paradigm?
I think we have heard already a lot of things about what AI can do and what AI needs to learn as well. QA is actually something that can be an avenue where AI can help us become more efficient. Internally, I think when you take a look at AI, AI can increase the speed of work compared to how we do it before. I remember one of my students who actually was from Dubai telling me about how he used AI in making 3 days work into 3 minutes. So I asked him, how do you assure that 3 days work that you used to do in coming up with a financial analysis, now reduced to 3 minutes, is of quality that you can rely on? And he said, well, initially I did not, simply because I have to make sure that the output is actually something that will also be the same if I have done it 3 days. Internally, I think that's how AI is helping us now. Now, people, I think what Neil mentioned, we still need people who are able to think, are able to do a lot of things that will help us assure that the AI's task, no matter how efficient they are, is still going to yield the same result if we do it ourselves. I think that's what happens internally. Now, externally, however, when you take a look at assurance, as Neil mentioned, the delivery models of firms, I think that's where AI will also help allow synthesis to happen. People from different backgrounds. Sometimes we have our own biases. Accountants and auditors, we have our biases compared to the social scientists, the economists, or even the weather specialist. And I think when you take a look at the work of an AI putting this together, it helps us start conversations for better clarity. And I think that begins sooner than later. And I think that's how quality can actually be assured both from internal and external perspective.
And Gerald has commended the good question by Advocate Nzaluba by indicating that he likes the idea of walled environments, but you do then limit the ML scope. Can't the sensitive data be desensitized and then model more generally, more wider data model across different industries? Perhaps maybe we need to introduce AI standards. Maybe AI standards. Not sure if there's anybody that has a comment. Yes, over to you, Faiza. Not yet. Someone has their mic on. Oh, sorry. Faiza, can I give him a chance to speak first? Thank you. You can go ahead, sir.
Okay. No, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for the presentations. I did find them so interesting, informative, and enjoyable. Highly appreciate it. Just maybe the simple one, you mentioned issue of ESG assurance practitioner. I just want to understand, okay, who is this person, and maybe what are the requirements? Are there any? Is it a regulated title? Who can provide this? I know we accountants, and we have also been criticized for say our titles are not regulated. Tomorrow I can just wake up and call myself an accountant, but doctors, they can't do. I just want to get more info about this person called ESG assurance provider. I can just comment about the educational experience and regulatory requirements. The second question, my research is on SMPs, small medium practices. I would like just to understand the role of SMPs. Are they really making inroads into this space, or is only still actually reserved for larger practices. If you can just comment about small medium practices, if they are really they have tapped into this particular lucrative market for providing such important professional services. The third comment maybe is on that, there's this other information section of the independent auditor's report. That other information section, the auditors, what they are saying, registered auditors in the South African context, they say they have read the other information, most probably non-financial information, as part of the financial statements, and they do not express an opinion. They are just saying nothing has come to attention that the information is inconsistent or whatever with the financial statement. Maybe from the question of advocate in terms of this regulatory versus I believe my audit of predetermined objectives in the South African context. Sorry. Is there any way that maybe we can able to arrive at the stage where independent auditors are actually expressing an opinion on that other information? And maybe the second question is that other information relates to the assurance report or non-assurance information or ESG information, for lack of better word. I just want to connect the two because I'm just putting myself in the shoes of user of these reports. I mean, it will be more helpful if actually that independent auditor's report that provides assurance about financial information also maybe gives me assurance about non-financial information, and I can make more like a joint holistic decision. Comes back to issue of advocate in terms of the municipality achieves clean audit opinion, but there is no running water in its jurisdiction, and just to get the non-financial and financial information together in a concise one report. Yes, the work could have been done outside the scope of financial statements audit using international standards in auditing, but the output of that particular process actually should manifest itself into a one report. Effectively, independent auditor's report actually even provides assurance about non-financial information, unlike having ISA whatever 3,000 whatever report sitting somewhere maybe at a different time compared to the independent auditor's report. Maybe lastly is the question of the curriculum. I'm just thinking about whether our curriculum is really responding to the current needs of the market. I mean, you highlighted the knowledge is needed, these CAs that actually are even inheriting, actually they don't actually possess. I mean the knowledge that actually you still have to subject them to further training in order to become these assurance providers. Really that actually really confirms that our curriculum is not actually responding, or even that practical actually experience that maybe audit firms in terms of articles they are currently providing is not actually meeting the needs of actually ESG space. Yeah. Thank you so much. Let me pause for now, and I will.
Do you want to respond or take another question? Okay.
Enough questions there.
There is. You can go ahead.
So the first question you asked around was around qualifications of an ESG practitioner. First of all, I use the term ESG practitioner because the term auditor is more confined to someone who's a chartered accountant. And we're building standards that are not dependent on you being a chartered accountant. Now that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Many of the European jurisdictions are allowing both chartered accountants and non-chartered accountants to deliver these services. And so you would have someone who's a practitioner rather than an auditor, because that's defined more closely in legislation. So we talk about practitioners because it's broader than just an auditor. Then what does it take for them to be a practitioner? And I think at the moment that's a good question, right? What does it take? And I think you're going to get a number of individuals holding themselves out that in fact aren't. Now for us, we have a code of conduct. And the code of conduct quite simply says, do not hold yourself out as something that you're not. And that would be one of the founding principles. And now that code is also going to be applicable to the non-auditors, or at least a similar code would be applicable to the non-auditors. And I agree it takes some judgment, but you'll need to make sure that you're not going to be holding yourself out as something that you're not. Internally in our firm, we're trying to do our level best to make sure that individuals aren't caught in a predicament where they're needing to deliver a service for which they're not yet qualified to do. And let me link it to the curriculum of which I know nothing about. Part of it is to say it's moving quite quickly. And so we're needing to upskill individuals that are already in our organization. And that's why the focus is there. But would I imagine that there's a time when students arrive already more rounded in terms of accounting, non-accounting, audit and assurance frameworks? I would hope that that is a world that is not too far out in our future. And if that means that it comes both into your curriculums as well as into psychotype curriculums, I want to go back to my opening line. That's a conversation that we need to get started so that we close down any expectation gaps around the types of individuals that we have. If I held out my organization as an organization that was primarily, fundamentally, and only going to do accounting and auditing, and you can come to my organization and we'll have no technology, no AI, and no ESG, I can tell you the queue to join us would be incredibly short. And so we have to hold our organization out as been investing in state-of-the-art technology so that you will be well equipped to deal with the circumstances and information to do your job. And two, it will have ESG as a watermark, regardless of what service it is that you are delivering to any entity. We would have ESG as a watermark. And that's what makes our profession and our organization attractive, so that we can deliver the highest quality. And I think that needs to extend throughout the value chain, from education, preparers, assurance providers, etc. So that's kind of my view as to what they would look like. I'm going to jump to other information. It's a great question on other information. And you're spot on. And that's where the European legislation would have. And the information will be disclosed together. And actually the financial information will now be treated as other information to the non-financial assurance provider. They have to now go and read the financial statements. And that statement that you see the financial auditor provider say, I've read the other information and nothing came to my attention that it's materially misstated, in relation to what they know. And what they know is the financial information. But suddenly, the financial information is going to have climate-related risk disclosures. And the non-financial person has been doing the GHG carbon footprint. He's saying, oh, wow, you've got a net zero ambition there, but I don't see this happening. Now I think we're going to start having more integrated discussions and debates as to whether this information is or isn't materially misstated. So this information is coming together. South Africa's got integrated reports. I think what we see in Europe is going to be broader than that. It's probably going to be an oversupply of information. But the other information will be assured. Limited assurance at first, evolving into reasonable assurance over the next 3 years. And I think that information, in terms of the quality of the information and the level of assurance, will start running more closely aligned. And the timing is what you spoke about as well. The timing, it needs to come together. And that's important. Our sustainable financials go out 3 months later, we get around to writing a sustainability report that we published. It's nowhere close to integrated. Small, medium practices. So I absolutely fundamentally believe that everyone has a role to play in this market. And this is not to the exclusion of any one firm from another. I don't work with small, medium practices on a daily basis. And so I'm not able to sort of clearly articulate the level of understanding, knowledge, skill, experience that they have in a particular ESG subject matter. But there's space for everyone to have a role. And as I said, this is a watermark that everyone needs to be participating in. And therefore, I definitely think they need to be able to carve out what their niche is and how they can deliver value in this space.
Okay, thank you. Faiza, your question?
Yes, thank you. I think my question kind of hinges on Dr. Clark Curry's. When listening to what you've presented and looking at what chartered accountants are required nowadays, especially in an academic environment, we already have an already heavily loaded curriculum that students have to go through in the 3 years of studying. And then to top it all, we've just recently getting acquainted or getting to terms with the new SAICA competency framework. I think that is what all universities are aligning themselves with. With the new sustainability standards, etc., being released, and also expecting students to also have the knowledge and around those standards. Are we not already overburdening them to a certain extent? I understand what you are saying, because for one, like I say, it's a highly specialized area. If we look at what is required with its own standards, etc. Secondly, already, you said our people right now to become assurance, providers, or like I say, practitioners, you are putting your people through 60 to 100 hours of training. If we look at what a student goes through, they have 120 notional hours per subject, whatever the case may be. So I would say is when we're looking at our curriculum, I think it's time that we also, because before I continue, I also seen that the IFAC is also looking to introduce this in the initial training of chartered accountants, and that's why my question. We should be really looking at how we educate people in sustainability a bit differently than everything coming through academia. Because even within the 4 disciplines itself, the way things are evolving and rapidly changing, by the time academia will catch up, it's already gone to another extent. I think that's my one comment. The other comment I had was, if you look at us as academics, we are not working every day with sustainability. My knowledge or area of specialization might not reach maybe the levels that it is required in practice. So we need to find somewhere to bridge that gap, because I can only give my students at this stage academic knowledge or the standard level of what is in the ISAs, but I cannot give them that practical understanding. Yes, maybe perhaps if I was in audit and also teaching or doing that, it would definitely be viable. But I think those are, when you talk about education and you talk about training, I think that is very important conversations to have. I think as academics, sorry.
Just press it again. No, just press it again.
Maybe I'm talking too long. Just my last comment is that I think it's not a lack of ability, but a lack of exposure. So that conversation, especially since it's coming from IFAC and the Assurance Standards Committee, it's something that should really be looked at. I don't think academics are scared of it, but you have to be able to benchmark it. If I look at current SAICA competencies right now, already there is no benchmark. For example, teaching just the sustainable development goals, to what extent our CA should have the knowledge, etc. Everybody's still getting there. So to come up with education training, I think we need to position it properly. I think we might even look at it being more of like I said, a specialization rather than a one-size-fits-all, or CA knowing everything. Thank you.
Professor Arno?
Thank you. I think what we have heard so far in this conversation is that academia should also learn how to come up with a new learning model. We cannot rely already on time-tested models where we have X number of hours of our students in tuition, and then after that you take an exam and then you get certified. Nowadays, I think when you take a look at the new generation of learners, and I think it's global, the Gen Zs, the upcoming Alpha generation, they're more differently wired, right? And I think as academe, we need to take a look at the curriculum that is robust and that is also very, very alive. And I mean, one, I think OBE is one area that we can continue to explore, outcomes-based. Second, experiential learning. Who says that in academe, you have to take course A before course B, before course C, and until you finish the entire curriculum, right?
Yeah.
Now, where is it that the learning really happens? And I think the learning that is actually going to happen more is when you have experience. And I'm alluding, for example, to certain educational practices that are now gaining ground, not only in accounting, but in other disciplines too. And I call that, for example, co-op ed. I'm not sure if that is something that has been discussed, cooperative education models. This is actually where academe and those in practice come together to mentor students while they are students. They work, they study, they experience. And I think that's a good model for them to learn more about understanding how to work with different disciplines and all. And I think that's what IFAC wants us to consider. The new model, rather than, I was expecting actually that IFAC would actually come up with a new set of competencies similar to an assurance, but what they did for sustainability or ESG, they embedded. I think we can take cue. Embedding means not setting it apart, but integrating it to the current way of learning. And that expands things. So rather than lectures, maybe you can actually have work. And that actually helps you gain one important thing, I think, that Neil mentioned. We need experience. Because without experience, there's no benchmark. How do you teach our student what will be the benchmark of how they do assurance? And I think they can start while they're students, rather than wait for them to do day one after they graduate and after they get their chartered accounting. That's my thought. And that's actually also what we're doing in our country too.
Right, over to you.
Sorry, I would say that in an ideal world that would be great, because of the challenges we experience currently. If, for example, I'm running a course for 3,000 students to get everybody to be mentored and assisted with work experience at the same time as studying would be kind of, it's almost it sounds like an impossible task if I said. I'm not saying what you're saying can't work. I think it's something, if you ask me for the course I'm teaching, it's actually a brilliant way of learning. Work-integrated learning could not be a better form of learning. Because what you learn in your traineeship, you cannot replace. But ideally, from where we're sitting to get to that point will obviously take time, resources, and I don't see it happening at least in the next 3 to 5 years, definitely not. So it's not being negative or critical, but it's about being practical, I think. So that's why I say sustainability reporting as a subject, it's perhaps required more for an intermediate or a higher level than more of students just starting out to become chartered accountants. And from I know the resilience of chartered accountants, we definitely can take it on. There's no doubt about it. But it's similar to like when you go into industry and you're doing banking, for example. You're not expected to know everything until you're actually there and doing the work. So I think it's amazing. I think the whole, the awareness definitely needs to be created from an academic level, by all means, because we cannot live in a vacuum and not know what's going on around there. And we should be thinking outside the box. But just when we look at the training and the level of knowledge, I think we need to position it properly. Otherwise, you'll be landing up with students that are good but not good enough because they don't have that exposure.
Right,
Thank
you. You wanted to
Thank you.
come? I'll take Prof, and then we'll have the last comment, and then we'll have the closure. Thanks.
So there are a few things that I'd want to add to the conversation. So one, I'm not burdened by the complexities of your curriculum. And so my ability to think around what the challenges are, I can't see all the challenges. But when I think about, we've got the same burden of volume on ourselves and on our teams. So the first thing we're looking to do is how do we reduce the volume so that they've got capacity to take on other challenges. At no point did I say we need fewer people, but I'm looking to get tasks. You had someone that took them 3 days, and it takes them 3 minutes. What do they do with the extra time? Did they just go and party, or could they use that extra time for something else? So identify ways in which you can get capacity. And we're using AI and technology primarily as a driver around trying to get capacity in individuals so that they can go and do other more interesting tasks or learn new subject matters. So that's number one. Find ways of getting capacity into your curriculum. 2, I can only speak as a parent, and I have 3 children, and I look at the way that my children are learning, and I can tell you that how they learn today is fundamentally different to how I learned, whether that was as a school student or at university. And their ability to consume a higher volume of content has significantly changed, whether it's through videos and clips. I was dependent on the one math teacher. There was one sole individual who was standing in front of me. And if I didn't hear what he said in that moment, I was done. Never again could I go to YouTube and get it in a different form. And so everything that came to me was channeled through a single individual. My children don't have that experience now. They've got channels and tubes and tutors and different things. And so the avenues to learn are broader. And that, I think, would help in terms of capacity. I didn't speak about it when I spoke earlier, but something else that we are doing is using service centers. So we have service centers to deliver in areas that we have capacity constraints. Service centers normally would be for routine type boring transactions. You'd send them off to some offshore place that has many people and it's a cheap labor. That's not what a service center is to us anymore, and this is where I think you can take the learning, is that we have service centers that are built of specialists. We have an organization of 250,000 people, and I don't think that we have access to sufficient specialists to be able to deliver the broad spectrum of information. So not for a moment do I believe that you can study up and then deliver a lecture to your students and they come away prepared in the subject matter as we spoke about. But I think that there's a service center solution for universities that you can explore. And it doesn't need to be South African. These challenges are international auditing standards. There are international accounting standards. There are international frameworks. You and I are international from different areas. And so explore service centers for lecturers so that you can get unique lectures delivered in subject matters. And I think that could be a solution for you. And then you spoke about specialists. Shouldn't we have specialists? So I've worked with specialists for over a decade. We cannot get the volume fast enough. And the overlay in skill sets that an auditor has for an ESG assurance provider is a significant overlay. What I need them to do is top up their subject matter. And so for us to be able to deliver to 50,000 organizations, I cannot train enough unique individuals to do that. But what I can do is top up the learning of 100,000. And that's why we have a model of integrating our auditors and our assurance practitioners rather than trying to build individuals that are more siloed in their delivery. That's just some of the way that we're going about it.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Karen Stander, not from the College of Accounting. I'm actually from the College of Economic and Management Sciences. I did study accounting though, a long time ago.
Okay.
This is more of a comment. So we are currently, and accounting, the College of Accounting is part of it, developing degrees focusing on the global sustainability challenges. And I do think the notion for me of just topping up knowledge, especially when it comes to environmental management and social management, governance, I can see, accountants, okay. But the other two things are so specialized, I don't think you can only call it a top-up. I think you would have to have guys that are multidisciplinary, skilled in this. And I think this is what the aim is of these degrees, is to develop multidisciplinary guys that have a know, that's why accounting is involved, that can do the assurance parts, but also have the skills in the other parts of the ESG. And it is possible to train these guys in, even with our numbers, with work integrated learning, if you just approach it a bit differently. So I think we need to, and this is what we are doing at the moment, is to just think about education, like you said, Prof, differently, and approach it differently. We've been approaching universities all over to see how we can co-teach modules with students all over the globe to leverage the knowledge from Canada, from Nigeria, from guys on the Indian Ocean brim. How do we leverage this education that's already there and make the student that come out a ESG, not necessarily ESG, sustainability specialist that would be able to, if he chooses to go into that field, provide that assurance. So I think it's just a comment. It is doable. We just need to get out of our silos and learn from each other.
No, thank you so much, Doc. I think the model of being taken out of silos has been really challenged, that we merge with other different spheres. We need to wrap it up quickly because there is another session that is happening at 12:30. So I will ask at this point in time Professor Barry to come forward. Thank you so much for bracing us, and then he will do the vote of thanks. You can go and sit. Thanks. Oops.
Good afternoon, still good morning, almost afternoon. Thank you very much for attending, those of you in person and those who are attending virtually. The one word that I heard repeatedly by all the speakers was discussion, conversation. Those of you who know me knows that I've been involved in sustainability issues despite being an auditor and in the auditing department since 2008, basically since the day I joined the university. At that stage, sustainability was kind of considered, the accountants on the loony edge, the loony accountants, because it wasn't mainstream. Today, it's probably still not mainstream, but it's getting there. It's around having that conversation. And Corin, very nice to meet you. Thanks for coming and accepting my invitation. What I think we need to look at is, where are we as accountants? Accounting is really about how do we account for what people do, for what organizations do, and to whom do we account? And I think that the three speakers that we've had today, firstly, thank you very, very much to everybody. I think the three speakers have been exceptional. I think they've shed a lot of light on some of the challenges that we are facing as the world and as the accounting profession. No longer are accountants those number crunchers. Bruce, you sort of mentioned, we kind of introverts. That's not the accountant. Back in the day, the accountant was the guy that sat in the back office, spoke to nobody, and generated a set of financials. That's not important anymore. Financials is part of the process, but it's around accounting for that organization in all its spheres, how it impacts the people, how it impacts the environment, and of course financially. It's around that whole culture. I'm trying to think, Chiku, you were the one that mentioned about the snow in the US. I just happened to have been caught in a snowstorm in the US 2 months ago. Unexpected. It wasn't on, when I looked at the weather apps, there was nothing. Suddenly the next day it was snowing. Okay. What we're finding, and I know that we're not necessarily talking about climate change, but the world is changing because we are not managing our resources. Now, some skeptics will say, well, it's a normal part of the evolutionary process. That might be true. Weather patterns do change, but the pace at which it's changing is increasing. If we're looking at things like weather is a lot more volatile. The impacts are a lot greater. We spoke about the floods in the Middle East. And Arnel, you had the picture there of the black swan. Black swans used to be those almost impossible things that we kind of knew existed, but was unlikely ever to happen. I think there's a lot more black swans flying around today. And we need to understand that as accountants. How does it affect what we do? Where do we fit into this? And this is just that conversation. Where do we fit into this equation? Accounting is one side, was one part of it, but we are part of a broader society, and I think we need to understand where we fit into that society. If I look, for instance, at, Gordon mentioned the new Global Sustainability Challenges qualifications matrix that we're doing. Now, it's basically taking a program from honors degree through to master's to PhD. So we're looking at preparing people, and what I also must emphasize is that it's interdisciplinary. This is a qualification that is, yes, it's being run through SEMS, but all the colleges are involved. I am involved from our college, to contribute in some way. What I was not aware of until fairly recently is that in 2019, our previous principal, Prof. Muckleneuk, signed a commitment to the SDGs on behalf of this university. And all it is, it's about looking at how do we communicate this, how do we champion this within the accounting environment, within the banking environment, within the different disciplines that we are sitting in. And we need to start talking about this and looking at how does this impact us. And this is just part today, was just part of that conversation. So I really just want to thank everybody that's been involved. And I know you didn't come here to listen to me, so I'm going to stop. Except, of course, I'm going to say that if it has intrigued you, which I hope it does, I am currently running a research project, and I'm looking for people that are interested. Okay, my project deals, and it's one of our CAS catalytic niche area conversions in a sense, and what we're looking at are the issues around reporting and accountability around some of the issues we've been talking around today. We are looking at 3 different legs to our project. The first one obviously deals with the SDGs. What did you say? We've got 5 years and 7 months to go before it expires. There's a lot of work that's being done. And where do the accountants come in? Well, we are kind of the experts at governance. We are kind of the experts at reporting, maybe not necessarily non-financial reporting, but we're getting there. And we can assist in that process. Edward, to answer your question that you had around, what makes an ESD specialist, the fact is that even though we often think that we are in charge, we are the best in the world, we are not the only players. And I think that that's important. But what we do have is that we have a code of ethics, a code of conduct, and professional standards that helps us to stand out above others. When I did my own doctorate, and I looked at assurance on sustainability reports, at that stage there's a lot of different players. The point is, should those really be players in the market? Or should it really be accountants? Now, it's not the exclusive domain of accountants, but as I say, we have that professional standards, that professional requirements that we need to keep up with, as well as the fact that I think around the world, the accounting profession is still seen in very high regard. The comment was made earlier around the fact that the standards that are being developed, ISO 5000, is not being developed for the accounting profession. It's being developed for all practitioners. And I think that's where we need to understand that we're not the only players. We are part of it, and we can help shape where this is going to go. Okay, so as I said, I've got a project, if people are interested. It's got 3 different legs. The one deals with sustainability, and in that regard I'm working with Arnell, because what we're looking at is comparing South Africa with a developing country in Asia. Now, many of you have looked at some of the literature on the topic would see that quite often, because of where we were historically, in terms of King and in terms of some of our frameworks, we often compare to countries from the global north. We compare to the likes of the US, the UK, Australia. But in reality, from an economic perspective, we're actually closer to the Philippines. So what we're starting to do is we're starting to work with the Philippines in terms of comparing ourselves to another developing country that's got similar challenges and problems that we're experiencing. Okay, so that's the one leg. The second leg is dealing with biodiversity. Some people touched on biodiversity today. Biodiversity really looks at things like some of the SDGs, SDG 14 and 15, life under the sea and life on water. Again, that's accountability. We're looking at some of those aspects. And then the third one of my postdocs who's sitting at the back, it's one of his areas of interest, and that is sustainable financing. Now, most of you know sustainable financing as in banks or financial institutions providing financial resources to organizations for capital projects, for instance, farms, responsible manufacturing processes. What we're looking at is something completely different, and that is in the biodiversity space. If we're looking at how do conservation NGOs fund themselves? Now, we are experiencing problems when it comes to attracting donor funding, because everybody's struggling. So they're looking at an instrument. If anybody knows about the rhino bonds that the World Wildlife Fund created a couple of years ago, it's the only conservation bond that exists. An organization that I'm involved with is now looking at a wild dog bond. And we're looking at that. Now, the mechanisms from an accounting perspective and from a research perspective, nobody's ever looked at this before. And my team will be looking at that. So there are 3 areas, and we have space. And we will be bringing in master's and doctoral students as well. So we'll be building capacity for supervision in this area. So if anybody's interested, please give me a call. So let me say then, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Prof. Arnell. Must I say thank you, Mr. Mr. Morris. Thank you, Neil. Warren, I don't think he's here, but I will drop him a note personally just to thank Warren for his contribution. I think we had a very stimulating day. I wish to thank everybody that was involved in arranging this event. Macy, I didn't see her, but thanks very much. Nsako, I saw you earlier. Thank you very much from a marketing perspective. The guys that have been involved in setting up the infrastructure, the social media, thank you everybody. And then thank you very much, Busi, for being the program director. And then, of course, thank you very much, Chiku, as the head of research, for supporting what we've been pushing for a couple of years. I think that as accounting, or as the accounting profession, we have a role to play and we can contribute. So thank you very much.
Hey, just to make sure that you are still alive, can I ask you to come down closer to me so that we can take a group photo? Thank you. Are you still being sustained? Come down. Can we all come down? And then just to announce that the lunch will be served in Exam Hall 2. If you don't know where Exam Hall 2 is, you go straight towards the escalators. You'll see the stairs, and then you go either down or up, but it's over that side. May you kindly come forward for us to take a group photo. Thank you very much.
you.